Welcome, my fellow traveler, in this quiet night. Welcome to a space where time bends and curves, where the worries of our modern world dissolve like morning mist. Allow your body to settle into that familiar embrace. Feel the weight of your blanket, soft and reassuring. Notice how your pillow cradles your head, how your breathing naturally slows and deepens. Tonight, we're going on a journey together, not through space, but through time itself. And I invite you, if you feel moved to share a little something in the comments about where you're listening from on this beautiful planet of ours. There's something magical about knowing we're connected across distances and time zones, all of us seeking the same gentle peace in the whispers of the past. And if these soft murmurs of history bring you comfort, a gentle subscription would help us meet again for more journeys into yesterday's embrace. Now, let your breath be your guide. Breathe in slowly and exhale even more slowly. Feel that familiar heaviness of approaching sleep beginning to pull you downward. But notice something different tonight. The air around you doesn't carry the familiar scents of your room anymore. Instead, there's something earthy and ancient drifting on the breeze. The smell of damp soil, of wood smoke curling lazily from a distant hearth, and just a hint of dried grass and livestock in the distance. You begin to stir, but not in your own bed. Your eyes flutter open to something unfamiliar yet strangely comforting. Beneath you is not your mattress, but something that rustles softly. A straw-filled mattress that pokes gently through rough woven fabric. The walls around you aren't painted drywall, but thick stone, fitted together with the patient hands of craftsmen who worked without the rush of deadlines. The only light comes from a single candle, its flame dancing and flickering, casting long, wavering shadows that seem to breathe with life of their own across these ancient walls. A moment of gentle confusion passes through you, then melts away, replaced by quiet curiosity. Don't be afraid. This isn't a nightmare you need to escape from. This is an invitation, an opportunity to walk in the shoes of those who came before us, to feel a different rhythm of life, all from the safety and warmth of your own modern bed. The air itself feels different here, heavier somehow, filled with the weight of centuries and the breath of countless souls who lived and loved and worked and dreamed in times when the world moved to a different beat. You can almost hear it. The distant sound of a church bell echoing across rolling hills, marking not the hour on a digital clock, but the rhythm of prayer that shaped each day like a gentle heartbeat. Welcome, dear listener, to the medieval world. Here, there are no screens glowing blue in the darkness, no notifications chiming through the night, no constant hum of electricity running through hidden wires. Instead, there's something profound in this simplicity, a kind of peace that comes from living closer to the earth, closer to the natural rhythm of sunrise and sunset, of seasons turning like the pages of an ancient book. You pull yourself up slowly on this straw mattress, feeling the rough texture of woolen clothing against your skin. Through a small window, just an opening in the stone, really, covered with oiled parchment instead of glass, you can see the first pale hints of dawn beginning to touch the horizon. This is where our story begins. Not with grand battles or royal proclamations, but with something much more intimate and real. We begin with the simple act of waking up in a world where every single thing you take for granted simply doesn't exist yet. And yet, somehow, life goes on. People love and laugh and worry and hope, just as they always have, just as they always will. The human heart, it seems, beats the same whether it's the year 2025 or 1225. Only the world around it changes, and tonight we get to explore that world together. So, settle deeper into your pillow now. Let your modern muscles relax as we step into this ancient skin. Feel the stone floor cold beneath bare feet. Smell the wood smoke and the mustiness of straw. Hear the distant lowing of cattle and the soft murmur of voices speaking languages that would sound strange to your ear, but somehow familiar to your soul. This is your invitation to slow down, to breathe at the pace of people who measured time not in minutes and seconds, but in the turning of seasons and the rhythm of bells calling faithful souls to prayer. Tonight, you are no longer bound by the frantic pace of our modern world. Tonight, you move with the measured steps of monks walking stone corridors, of farmers whose hands know the feel of earth and grain, of craftsmen whose work is measured not in deadlines, but in the quiet satisfaction of a thing well made. Welcome to the medieval world, where time moves like honey, thick and golden and sweet. Chapter 1. The harsh truth of morning. Readjusting your senses. You sit up slowly and immediately understand why medieval people rose with the sun. This straw mattress. Well, calling it a mattress is perhaps generous. Individual pieces of straw poke through the rough hemp fabric like tiny persistent fingers, each one finding a different spot on your skin to remind you that comfort, as you know it, is a very modern invention. You shift, trying to find a position that doesn't involve direct conversation with the straw, and you feel something small scurrying away beneath you. Don't be alarmed. You've just met one of your many roommates. Bedbugs, fleas, mice, and various other creatures considered sharing your sleeping space to be perfectly normal social etiquette in this era. The romance of sleeping on straw fades quickly when you realize it's essentially a rustic ecosystem, complete with its own tiny residents who pay no rent and follow no lease agreements. But let's put this in perspective. This straw mattress represents luxury beyond the dreams of most people in this world. For the vast majority of medieval humanity, a bed means a pile of straw or hay directly on the earthen floor, shared with parents, children, and possibly the family pig if the weather turns particularly cold. Privacy is a concept that hasn't been invented yet, not because people lack imagination, but because survival makes such ideas seem frivolous. You look around for what your modern mind automatically seeks: the bathroom. Here's where our medieval adventure takes its first genuinely humbling turn. The concept of a private bathroom simply doesn't exist. If you're remarkably fortunate, there might be a wooden chamber pot lurking in the corner of this room, handcrafted from oak and about as comfortable as you might imagine. More likely, you'll find a simple ceramic bowl, rough-hewn and unglazed, serving the same essential function. And here comes our first clippable moment. Your morning routine includes a charming medieval custom called Gardy Lou. No, that's not a greeting. It's what people shout before emptying their chamber pots directly out the window onto the street below. Gardes low. Watch out for the water. Though calling it water is optimistic at best. This is why, if you ever wondered, medieval people walking through cities stayed close to the buildings rather than the center of the street. A morning shower in London, circa 1300, might involve more than just rainwater, and umbrellas won't help you with everything falling from above. The streets themselves become let's call it, an open-air sewage system. Every morning, the detritus of the night cascades from windows like a particularly unfortunate waterfall. The smell that rises from the cobblestones, particularly on warm days, would knock a modern person sideways. But here, it's simply the perfume of civilization. Now, about those teeth you're running your tongue over. There's no mint-flavored paste in a convenient tube, no soft, bristled brush designed by dental professionals. If you're particularly conscientious about oral hygiene, you might rub your teeth with a rough piece of cloth, possibly dipped in a mixture of crushed herbs and salt that tastes approximately like regret mixed with brine. Or you might chew on a fibrous twig until it frays into something resembling a brush. More likely, you simply don't. Dental care consists mainly of hoping your teeth don't hurt too much and trying not to breathe directly on anyone you're fond of. Morning breath is not just a personal problem. It's a community experience. Everyone shares in the aromatic symphony of a world without toothpaste, mouthwash, or the concept that breath should smell like anything other than whatever you last ate, which was probably quite some time ago. The water you might use to wash your face, if water is available at all, comes from a wooden bucket that's been sitting in this room for, well, probably longer than you'd prefer to know. It's lukewarm at best, often sporting a thin film of dust or other particles that have settled overnight. Medieval people didn't drink much water, not because they disliked it, but because it was frequently unsafe. Rivers and wells often doubled as waste disposal systems, making water consumption a form of medieval Russian roulette. Your stomach growls, a sound that echoes slightly off the stone walls, reminding you that medieval acoustics have their own character. You make your way to what serves as the living area of this single-room dwelling, where breakfast is being prepared over an open fire that crackles and pops with a sound that's both comforting and slightly menacing. The aroma greeting you is distinctive. Porridge made from barley or oats bubbles away in an iron pot that's probably older than several generations of the family using it. This isn't the creamy, sweetened oatmeal of your modern experience. This is a dense, hearty gruel that tastes primarily of grain and survival. No sugar, no honey, unless you're extraordinarily fortunate, and certainly no maple syrup or brown sugar to make it palatable. The primary beverage being offered isn't coffee. Coffee won't reach Europe for several more centuries. It's not orange juice, which won't be a breakfast staple for even longer. Instead, you're handed a wooden mug filled with small ale, essentially weak beer that tastes like someone took regular beer and explained the concept of alcohol to it from a distance. But here's the fascinating thing. Everyone drinks this, from toddlers barely old enough to walk to grandparents whose few remaining teeth are grateful for liquid nutrition. This isn't medieval irresponsibility. It's medieval survival strategy. The brewing process kills the bacteria that makes water dangerous, and the low alcohol content provides calories and nutrients that pure water simply can't offer. Essentially, weak beer is safer than water, more nutritious than water, and, let's be honest, probably more psychologically comforting when facing another day of medieval existence. Children nurse from their mothers until they're old enough to handle a mug, then transition directly to small ale. By modern standards, entire medieval villages are slightly buzzed from dawn to dusk. But this isn't intoxication. It's hydration with benefits. The world makes slightly more sense when you're perpetually, mildly under the influence, which might explain how people tolerated the various discomforts of medieval life with such apparent equanimity. The bread accompanying your porridge tells its own story. This isn't soft, white, pre-sliced convenience. Medieval bread is dense, dark, and could probably be used as a construction material in emergencies. It's often several days old because bread is precious, and wasting food isn't just wasteful. It's potentially life-threatening. The crust is hard enough to require serious jaw commitment, and the interior has the texture of compressed virtue. But here's where medieval ingenuity shines. This hard bread serves as your plate. Called a trencher, it's carved with a shallow depression to hold stew, porridge, or whatever constitutes the meal. You eat the food from the bread plate, and when you're finished, you eat the plate itself. If you're feeling generous or your bread has become too soggy to be appetizing, you might give it to the poor, to the animals, or to the children who are always hovering hopefully around mealtimes. This is recycling at a level that would impress modern environmentalists. Your dishes are edible. Your leftovers become animal feed. And nothing goes to waste because waste is a luxury that hunger doesn't permit. The fat used for cooking comes from whatever animal was most recently available. Pig fat, beef tallow, or if you're coastal, perhaps fish oil. The resulting flavors are robust. Everything tastes like it was cooked by someone who understood that food is fuel first, pleasure second, and that survival doesn't care about your palate preferences. Vegetables, if available, are usually root vegetables that store well through winter. Turnips, carrots, onions. They're often slightly withered, sometimes a bit soft, but they provide essential nutrients that keep scurvy and other deficiency diseases at bay. Fresh vegetables are seasonal luxuries, available only when nature provides them and preservation methods allow. Time to get dressed, which in medieval terms means pulling on layers of rough, hand-woven fabric that will serve as your uniform for, well, possibly months at a time. That closet full of choices you're accustomed to, that daily decision about what to wear, pure fantasy here. You own, if you're fortunate, perhaps two sets of clothing. What you're wearing and what you wear when the first set becomes absolutely unwearable. Laundry isn't a weekly chore. It's a seasonal event requiring significant planning, labor, and resources. Clothes are expensive because every single thread has been spun by hand, every piece of fabric woven on manual looms, every garment sewn by candlelight during long winter evenings. Your tunic is wool, probably brown or gray, or the natural undyed color of whatever sheep contributed to its existence. The fabric is thick and rough against your skin, designed for durability rather than comfort. Underneath, if you're particularly well off, you might have a linen undershirt, but more likely, the wool sits directly against your skin, making you grateful that medical knowledge of skin allergies won't be discovered for several centuries. Your breeches, medieval pants, essentially, are held up with a rope belt because elastic hasn't been invented and won't be for about 600 years. The concept of underwear, in any modern sense, simply doesn't exist. What you're wearing is what you're wearing. And privacy, concerns about changing clothes, are solved by the simple expedient of not changing clothes very often. But here's where medieval society reveals its fascinating complexity. Color is a language, and that language speaks directly about your place in the world's hierarchy. The bright, vibrant colors you're accustomed to seeing everywhere, brilliant reds, deep blues, rich purples. These are rarer than gold and more precious than jewelry. Creating bright red dye requires cochineal insects imported from distant lands, or madder root processed through complex, expensive techniques. Deep blue comes from indigo or woad, plants that require specific growing conditions and elaborate processing. Purple, the rarest of all, comes from murex shells found in Mediterranean waters, requiring literally thousands of shells to produce even small amounts of dye. If you see someone wearing a rich purple garment, you're looking at either royalty, high church officials, or someone so wealthy that they can afford to literally wear a small fortune. That purple cloak represents the labor of hundreds of people: the divers who collected shells, the craftsmen who processed them, the weavers who created the fabric, the tailors who cut and sewed the garment. Most people wear the colors of undyed wool: brown, beige, gray, cream. These aren't fashion choices, they're economic realities. Your social status can be read from 50 yards away simply by noting whether your clothes contain any color more vibrant than mud. The wealthy don't just wear different colors, they wear different fabrics entirely. While you're wrapped in rough wool, the nobility drapes itself in silk imported from China, linen so fine it feels like modern cotton, and furs from animals that most people will never see alive. Their clothing isn't just more comfortable, it's a walking advertisement of their access to international trade networks, skilled craftsmen, and financial resources. But as you step outside this simple dwelling, adjusting your rough wool tunic and rope belt, something remarkable happens. The world isn't the gray, colorless place you might expect. Yes, the people are dressed in earth tones, but the earth itself provides a palette that no medieval dyer could replicate. The green of leaves, the brown of soil, the gray of stone, the blue of sky. There's a strange beauty in this simplicity, this honest relationship between what people wear and what they can afford. No one is pretending to be something they're not, because their clothes make such pretense impossible. Everyone's place in society is immediately visible, which eliminates certain kinds of social anxiety while creating others. As you begin to move through this world, your modern sensibilities adjusting to medieval realities, you start to understand that this isn't a simpler time so much as a more honest one. Everything requires effort. Nothing comes without cost. Comfort is earned rather than assumed. And somehow, in accepting these limitations, people found ways to create joy, beauty, and meaning that didn't depend on convenience, choice, or technological assistance. They found richness in scarcity, beauty in simplicity, and community in shared hardship. The morning sun climbs higher, warming your wool-clad shoulders as you prepare to discover what a day actually feels like when it's measured not in hours and minutes, but in the rhythm of sunrise and sunset, the tolling of church bells, and the patient, seasonal turning of an agricultural world that moves at the speed of growth itself. Chapter 2: The Rhythm of Work. Time measured by the sun. Time moves differently here. Your modern mind, trained to slice each day into precise 60-minute segments, struggles to understand a world where time flows like honey, thick, golden, and impossible to hurry. There are no digital displays counting down the seconds, no alarms screaming you awake at predetermined moments, no meeting scheduled for 2:47 p.m. Mechanical clocks exist, but they're rarer than unicorns and nearly as magical to most people. Only the wealthiest cathedrals and monasteries possess these marvels of engineering, great mechanical beasts that chime the hours with sounds that carry for miles across the countryside. For you, for most of humanity in this era, time is measured by something far more ancient and reliable: the great celestial clock that has been marking human days since the beginning of consciousness itself. The sun rises, travels its arc across the sky, and sets. The moon waxes and wanes. The seasons turn with the patience of eternity itself. But listen, there, cutting through the morning air, comes the sound that truly governs your day. Church bells, bronze voices calling across the fields and rooftops, marking not the arbitrary divisions of hours and minutes, but the sacred rhythm of canonical hours that has shaped Christian life for centuries. Ding dong, ding dong. First comes matins, rung before dawn while the world still sleeps in darkness. Then lauds, coinciding with the first pale light of sunrise. Prime follows at what you might think of as 6 in the morning, terce at 9, sext at noon, none at 3 in the afternoon, vespers as the sun begins its descent, and finally Compline as darkness settles over the world like a gentle blanket. These bells don't just mark time, they sanctify it. Each peal reminds you that your day is held within something larger than yourself, that your small human activities are part of a divine rhythm that connects you to every other soul hearing these same bronze voices across the Christian world. Your body adapts to this rhythm with surprising ease, without artificial light to extend the day, without caffeine to trick your nervous system into alertness, without any of the chemical interventions that divorce modern humans from their natural circadian rhythms. You find yourself naturally waking as the first gray light touches the horizon and growing drowsy as darkness falls. In summer, when the sun generously stretches the day from early morning until late evening, you work long hours, but work at the pace of the season itself. In winter, when daylight is precious and brief, you work shorter hours and spend long evenings by the fire, telling stories, mending tools, or simply sitting in the companionable silence that comes from shared labor and shared rest. This isn't efficiency as you know it. This is something deeper: harmony. Your work flows with the natural world rather than fighting against it. You plant when the earth is ready, harvest when the crops are ready, rest when your body and the season demand rest. There's no concept of working 8 hours a day. You work until the work is done, or until darkness makes continuing impossible, or until your body tells you it's time to stop. Some days are long and demanding, others shorter and more reflective. The rhythm varies like breathing, expanding and contracting with natural necessity rather than artificial scheduling. Imagine yourself now walking toward the fields as the morning mist rises from the earth, like the breath of sleeping giants. Your feet know the path without conscious thought, having walked it every day since childhood, just as your father walked it before you. and his father before him. The fields stretch before you in long, narrow strips, not the vast mechanized expanses of modern agriculture, but a patchwork quilt of individual family holdings. Your strip lies next to your neighbor's, and his next to another's, creating a community of soil and sweat that binds you all together in ways that go deeper than friendship. You carry simple tools, a wooden plow that your grandfather carved, its iron tip forged by the village blacksmith and shaped by generations of contact with this particular earth. A scythe for cutting grain, its blade worn smooth and sharp through countless harvests. A hoe for breaking clods and fighting weeds, its handle polished by thousands of hours in your calloused hands. The work is repetitive, beautifully, meditatively, almost hypnotically repetitive, step by step behind the plow, feeling the resistance of earth against iron, the steady pull of the ox or horse drawing your furrow across the field. The plow cuts, the earth turns, dark and rich and smelling of centuries of growth and decay and renewal. Scrape, thud, scrape, thud, scrape, thud. Your breathing synchronizes with your steps with the animal's pace, your pace with something even deeper, the rhythm of agriculture itself. Unchanged since humans first scratched seeds into soil and waited for the miracle of growth. Behind you, the furrows lie open like sleeping mouths, ready to receive seed. The earth here has been planted and harvested for longer than anyone can remember. Fed with the manure of animals, the ashes of wood fires, the compost of kitchen scraps and fallen leaves. It's rich, dark, alive with earthworms and beneficial insects that you've learned to recognize as partners in the ancient collaboration between human and soil. As you work, your neighbors work their strips nearby. There's Thomas, whose plow moves with the same steady rhythm as yours. There's Margaret, using a hoe to break up clods in soil already plowed. There's young William, barely old enough for such labor, but learning the rhythm that will govern his entire life. Sometimes you work in companionable silence, each focused on your own task, but aware of the others, like musicians in an orchestra, where the music is the sound of tools against earth, breath in lungs, and the quiet satisfaction of necessary work being done well. Sometimes conversation flows across the strips. Gossip about who's planning to marry whom. Concerns about whether the weather will hold. Stories passed down from older generations about years when the harvest failed, or seasons when it exceeded all hopes. These aren't idle chats. They're the oral history of your community, the accumulated wisdom of people whose survival depends on reading the subtle signs of weather, soil, and season. When the sun reaches its peak, you pause for the midday meal. Not because a clock tells you it's 12 o'clock, but because the sun is directly overhead and the heat makes continued labor uncomfortable. You gather in whatever shade you can find, under a tree at the field's edge. or in the shadow of the village church if you're working close enough. The meal is simple: bread, cheese if you're fortunate, perhaps an onion or apple, and always that ubiquitous weak ale that serves as both hydration and sustenance. You eat with hands still dirty from work because soap is precious and water for washing must be carried from the village well. But there's something profoundly satisfying about this meal earned through morning labor, eaten in the company of people who understand exactly what you've been doing because they've been doing the same thing right beside you. The food tastes better when you've worked for it, when you can look across the field and see the visible progress of your morning's efforts. As afternoon heat gives way to evening coolness, you resume work, but the pace changes. There's less urgency now, more conversation. Children appear, released from their own small labors, playing at the edges of the fields while keeping one eye on their parents. Elderly relatives arrive to help with lighter tasks or simply to provide company and advice. The end of the workday isn't marked by a whistle or time clock. It comes when the light begins to fade, when continuing becomes difficult rather than merely uncomfortable. Tools are cleaned and stored, animals led back to shelter, plans made for tomorrow's continuation of work that is never truly finished but only paused until the next day's beginning. Walking home in the gathering dusk, your body tired but satisfied, you carry with you something that has largely disappeared from modern work. The certainty that what you've done today matters. The furrows you've plowed will yield grain. The grain will become bread. The bread will feed your family and your community. Your labor is connected to survival in ways so direct that questions about purpose or meaning simply don't arise. But perhaps your path leads not to the fields, but into the village itself, where smoke rises from the workshops of artisans whose skills represent the accumulated knowledge of generations. Imagine now that you are a blacksmith, keeper of fire, and shaper of iron, whose work provides the tools that make all other work possible. Your workshop faces the main street of the village, open to the air and the constant flow of neighbors who might need horseshoes, nails, hinges, or the countless iron necessities that hold medieval life together. The forge stands at the center of your world, a great hearth built of stone and clay, fed with charcoal that burns with intense, concentrated heat. Clang, 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 the rhythm of your hammer against anvil provides a steady heartbeat for the entire village. Children learn to nap to this sound. Adults use it to gauge the time of day, and other craftsmen synchronize their own work to your metallic melody. You are the drummer of the village orchestra, keeping time for everyone else's labor. The fire must be tended constantly, fed with charcoal, blown to proper heat with great leather bellows that whoosh and wheeze like the breathing of some enormous animal. The temperature of your fire is measured not with instruments, but with experience. The color of the flames, the behavior of the metal, the feel of heat against your face that tells you when iron is ready to bend to your will. You take a piece of raw iron, black and cold, and thrust it into the glowing heart of your forge. As it heats, it changes color, first dark red, then bright red, then orange, then yellow-white, each hue telling you something about its readiness to be shaped. The iron becomes plastic, malleable, eager to take whatever form your hammer and anvil can convince it to accept. Whoosh goes the bellows, hiss goes the hot iron against the anvil, clang goes your hammer, finding its mark. Each strike has purpose, moving metal molecule by molecule toward the shape you envision. A horseshoe emerges from formless iron through hundreds of careful blows, each one precisely placed, each one building on the last. The work requires your entire body. Your arm swings the hammer, but the power comes from your back, your legs, your core. Your eyes judge the color and shape of the metal, but your hands feel the resistance, the give, the moment when stubborn iron decides to cooperate. Your ears hear the subtle differences in sound that tell you whether your blow has achieved its purpose or needs correction. Between pieces, while iron heats or cools, you prepare for the next task. Horseshoes must be fitted to individual horses, each animal's hooves measured, and the iron shaped accordingly. Kitchen knives need handles wrapped with leather or wood. Hinges require precise alignment so that doors will swing properly for decades of use. Your customers arrive throughout the day, bringing their various needs and their own expertise. The farmer knows exactly how sharp his plow point should be. The carpenter has specific requirements for his nails. The housewife knows which pot handle has worn thin and needs replacement. You listen to their requirements, ask questions that demonstrate your understanding of their work, and promise completion times based on your knowledge of iron and fire rather than arbitrary scheduling. Young apprentices work beside you, learning not just the techniques of metalworking, but the entire culture of craftsmanship. They begin with the simplest tasks: working the bellows, sorting nails, cleaning tools. Gradually, they progress to holding work steady while you hammer, then to making simple items under your supervision, and finally to complex pieces that require years of accumulated skill. This isn't education as you know it, with textbooks and tests and grades. This is learning through observation, imitation, and endless practice. The apprentices absorb not just technical knowledge, but the ethics of craftsmanship, the importance of quality work, fair dealing with customers, and pride in creation that will outlast its maker. Your guild, the Brotherhood of Smiths, sets standards for your work, protects your interests, and provides a social safety net that extends far beyond business relationships. Guild members help each other through difficult times, share techniques and innovations, and maintain the reputation of their craft. You are not just a blacksmith, you are part of an ancient brotherhood that traces its traditions back to the legendary smiths of mythology and saga. As evening approaches and the natural light fades, you bank your fire for the night, covering the coals with ash so they'll retain heat until morning, while burning slowly and safely through the dark hours. Your tools are cleaned and arranged with the precision of ritual, not because you're obsessively neat, but because tomorrow's work depends on finding what you need quickly and efficiently. The transition from work to rest happens gradually, naturally. As the light dims, the pace of work slows. Customers stop arriving. Apprentices finish their tasks and head home, and you find yourself with time to reflect on the day's accomplishments. Perhaps you've completed a commission that will serve its owner for decades. Perhaps you've solved a technical problem that had been puzzling you. Perhaps you've simply maintained the steady rhythm of creation that keeps your community functioning. Like the farmer, you end your day with the satisfaction of work that matters, that connects directly to the needs of real people living real lives. The horseshoes you forged will carry travelers safely along difficult roads. The knives you've sharpened will prepare food for families. The hinges you've crafted will swing on doors for generations, outlasting perhaps even your own memory in the village where you lived and worked. There is a profound peace in this rhythm of necessary labor. This cycle of fire and iron and human skill that creates the tools upon which all other work depends. Your craft connects you to every other person in your community while giving you a unique and essential role in their shared survival. As darkness finally settles over the village and the last light fades from your workshop windows, you carry with you the quiet satisfaction of another day in the ancient rhythm of human making, human creating, human work that has meaning because it serves life itself. Tomorrow will bring the same rhythm: fire to tend, iron to shape, customers to serve, apprentices to teach. And in that repetition, that return to familiar patterns, there's not boredom, but something deeper. The comfort of belonging to something larger than yourself, something that connects you to the long chain of craftsmen who have worked before you and will work after you, keeping alive the essential skills that transform raw materials into the tools of human civilization. Chapter 3: Entertainment and Fear. The spiritual world of medieval people. As darkness settles over your medieval world like a familiar blanket, something magical happens. The practical concerns of daylight, plowing, hammering, cooking, mending, give way to something deeper, older, more mysterious. This is when the stories begin. Entertainment here isn't something you watch on a screen. It isn't produced by strangers in distant studios, and consumed passively while sitting alone. Entertainment is live, communal, participatory, and as essential to survival as bread and water. Because in a world without books for most people, without newspapers or any form of recorded information, stories are how knowledge travels, how wisdom is preserved, how communities make sense of their place in the vast, often frightening universe. Gathered around the fire that provides the only light in this darkness, your family and neighbors become an audience for something that is part education, part spiritual instruction, and part pure wonder. The traveling minstrels who arrive in your village aren't just entertainers. They're libraries on legs, carrying in their memories the great stories that bind all of Christendom together. Their voices rise and fall with practiced skill, weaving tales that have been told for generations, each telling slightly different from the last, shaped by the teller's personality and the audience's needs. Tonight, perhaps, you hear the story of King Arthur and his knights, gathered around their own circular table, bound by oaths of honor and fellowship that seem both impossibly noble and strangely familiar. The minstrel's voice grows soft and mysterious as he speaks of the Holy Grail, that cup which once held the blood of Christ himself, now hidden somewhere in the world, waiting for a night pure enough to find it. His voice strengthens with excitement as he describes Sir Lancelot's prowess in battle, then grows heavy with sorrow as he tells of the knight's forbidden love for Queen Guinevere and the tragedy that follows. These aren't just stories, they're instruction manuals for living. Through Arthur's Knights, you learn about loyalty, courage, the importance of keeping promises, and the terrible consequences when personal desire conflicts with duty. Through Roland's last stand at Roncevaux, you understand that some things are worth dying for. Through the tales of Charlemagne, you glimpse what it means to be a Christian king in a world that seems perpetually threatened by chaos. But the minstrels don't only carry the great epic tales. They also bring news from the wider world, gossip from other villages, and songs that everyone can join in singing. Music isn't something you listen to. It's something you do, together, your voices blending in harmonies that have been passed down through generations. When the professional storytellers move on to the next village, the local stories emerge. These are more intimate, more personal, and often more immediately practical. Your grandmother tells tales passed down from her grandmother about the winter when the wolves came right up to the village walls, and how the people survived by sharing their meager stores and keeping fires burning throughout the night. But alongside these practical stories flow others that would make modern person pause and wonder about the boundary between reality and imagination. Here, in this flickering firelight, the distinction between the world you can touch and the world you can only sense becomes beautifully, mysteriously blurred. People really, truly believe in fairies living in the forest, in goblins that delight in playing tricks on mortals, in spirits that inhabit wells and trees and crossroads. This isn't primitive superstition. It's a different way of understanding a world filled with forces beyond human comprehension. Families leave small bowls of milk on their doorsteps at night, not as quaint decoration, but as serious offerings to the fairy folk who might otherwise take offense and cause crops to fail or children to sicken. Every village has its haunted places. The crossroads where a suicide was buried, the bridge where a merchant was murdered, the old oak tree where strange lights are sometimes seen dancing on moonless nights. These aren't just stories, they're warnings, maps of a spiritual landscape that must be navigated as carefully as any physical terrain. The forest, which provides wood for building and fuel, herbs for medicine, and game for the pot, is also a place of mystery and potential danger. It's home to hermits seeking God in solitude, to outlaws fleeing justice, and to creatures that exist somewhere between the natural and supernatural worlds. Wolves are a real threat, but they're also symbols of the wild forces that civilization struggles to hold at bay. Bears are dangerous animals, but they're also manifestations of untamed nature that demands respect and caution. Children grow up with these stories as their first education, learning not just to fear genuine dangers, but to understand their place in a universe populated by forces both seen and unseen, both benevolent and threatening. They learn that respectful behavior toward the supernatural world is as important as practical skills for dealing with the natural one. Adults tell these stories not just to entertain children, but to remind themselves that human understanding has limits, that humility in the face of mystery is not just virtuous, but necessary for survival. In a world where sudden illness can kill without explanation, where crops sometimes fail despite careful tending, where natural disasters strike without warning, acknowledging the existence of forces beyond human control provides both explanation and comfort. But medieval life isn't all work and worry and mysterious terrors lurking in dark forests. There is joy here, abundant and infectious and utterly communal. The church calendar provides numerous feast days throughout the year, and each one is an excuse to set aside labor and celebrate with an enthusiasm that would exhaust modern partygoers. Christmas doesn't last for one day. It stretches across 12 magnificent days of feasting, singing, drinking, and merrymaking that transform the darkest, coldest time of year into a sustained celebration of light conquering darkness. The entire community participates, from the wealthiest landowner to the poorest serf, all united in shared joy that makes social distinctions temporarily irrelevant. Easter brings its own celebrations, marking not just religious resurrection, but the literal resurrection of the natural world as winter gives way to spring. Pentecost, Michaelmas, the feast days of local saints, Each provides an occasion for the community to come together and remember that life contains more than just labor and survival. Imagine yourself at a village festival. The music comes from instruments made by local craftsmen, bagpipes that wheeze and drone with earthy, hypnotic rhythms, wooden flutes that trill like bird song, drums that provide a heartbeat for dancers whose movements have been passed down through generations. This isn't performance music, it's participatory music. Everyone dances, everyone sings, everyone contributes to the collective joy. The dancing isn't the formal, structured choreography of later aristocratic courts. It's exuberant, communal, with patterns that everyone knows because they've been doing them since childhood. Circles and lines and spirals that weave the community together physically as well as spiritually, that celebrate the human body's capacity for joy and movement and shared rhythm. Competitions provide excitement and spectacle, wrestling matches between the strongest men, archery contests that serve as both entertainment and military training, foot races that determine the fastest runner in the village. These aren't professional sports. They're celebrations of human skill and physical capability, chances for individuals to distinguish themselves while entertaining their neighbors. And throughout it all flows ale, rivers of it, brewed specifically for these occasions, and stronger than the daily small ale that serves as routine hydration. This isn't alcoholism, it's communal intoxication as a form of social bonding, a way of temporarily dissolving the careful social distinctions that ordinarily govern daily life. Lords drink with peasants, craftsmen compete with farmers, young people court under the benevolent supervision of their elders, all lubricated by fermented grain that makes everyone more generous, more forgiving, more willing to overlook the small grievances that accumulate during ordinary times. The fair represents a different kind of celebration, one that brings together people from multiple communities and offers glimpses of the wider world that most villagers will never travel to see. Merchants arrive with goods from distant places, spices from the Orient that smell like concentrated sunshine, silk fabrics that feel impossibly smooth against skin accustomed to rough wool, jewelry and trinkets that speak of craftsmanship, techniques unknown in your local workshops. But the fair isn't just about commerce. It's about spectacle, wonder, entertainment that expands your understanding of what human beings can do and be. Acrobats perform feats that seem to defy the laws of nature, contorting their bodies into impossible shapes, leaping and tumbling with a grace that makes gravity seem optional. Fire eaters demonstrate mastery over the element that everyone else fears, swallowing flames as casually as eating bread. Performing bears dance to music, trained through techniques that would horrify modern animal rights advocates, but that represent the medieval belief that all creation can be brought into harmony with human purpose. Jugglers keep multiple objects dancing in the air with a skill that seems magical to people whose own manual dexterity is devoted to practical tasks like weaving and forging. Storytellers from distant lands bring versions of familiar tales told with exotic accents and unfamiliar details, plus entirely new stories about places where the customs are so different they might as well be describing other planets. Through their tales, you learn about kingdoms where people worship different gods, about lands where the climate is so warm that snow never falls, about cities so large that they contain more people than your entire region. The fair represents temporary abundance in a world where scarcity is normal. For a few days, there's more food than anyone can eat, more entertainment than anyone can absorb, more sensory stimulation than ordinary life provides in months. Children gorge themselves on honey cakes and sweet fruits, while adults sample exotic delicacies that they'll remember and talk about for years afterward. But perhaps the most important function of both festivals and fairs is the way they reinforce community bonds while providing safe spaces for courtship, friendship formation, and the kind of social mixing that ordinary life doesn't permit. Young people from different villages meet and evaluate each other as potential marriage partners. Craftsmen from different guilds share techniques and compare their skills. Merchants establish the relationships that will govern trade throughout the coming year. These gatherings provide psychological relief from the isolation that characterizes much of medieval life. For most of the year, your world consists of your immediate family and neighbors. The same faces every day, the same conversations, the same routines. Festivals and fairs break that pattern, providing novelty, excitement, and the reminder that the world contains more possibilities than your daily experience suggests. But even in the midst of joy and celebration, medieval life contains undertones of fear that modern people struggle to comprehend. These aren't irrational terrors. They're responses to a world where human knowledge has clear limits and where forces beyond understanding can strike without warning. Disease, for instance, isn't caused by microscopic organisms that can be identified, studied, and defeated with pharmaceutical interventions. Instead, illness results from an imbalance of the four humors that govern human health: blood, phlegm, choler, yellow bile, and melancholy, black bile. Treatment involves restoring balance through bloodletting, purging, and dietary adjustments that sometimes help and sometimes make things worse, with no reliable way to predict which outcome will occur. When someone sickens suddenly, when children die despite careful nursing, when plagues sweep through communities killing seemingly at random, the causes must be sought in spiritual rather than physical realms. Perhaps God is punishing the community for collective sins. Perhaps a witch has cursed someone out of spite or malice. Perhaps the stars are aligned in ways that bring misfortune to human endeavors. These explanations aren't scientific, but they're not necessarily wrong in their basic insight that human life exists within forces larger and more complex than individual understanding can grasp. Medieval people live with a humility about human knowledge that has been largely lost in subsequent centuries, an acknowledgement that there are more things in heaven and earth than can be explained by current understanding. The darkness itself carries terrors that artificial lighting has taught modern people to forget. Without streetlights, without flashlights, without any reliable source of illumination beyond candles and torches that can be extinguished by wind or rain, darkness is absolute and often dangerous. Roads become impassable, predatory animals grow bold, and human criminals find cover for activities that daylight would prevent. But beyond these practical dangers lurk others that exist somewhere between physical reality and spiritual metaphor. The forest at night might contain actual wolves, but it also harbors creatures that don't quite fit natural categories. Werewolves that represent the beast within human nature, spirits of the dead who cannot find rest, demons that seek opportunities to tempt souls away from salvation. The church provides comfort and explanation for many fears, but it also creates new ones. The promise of eternal salvation comes paired with the threat of eternal damnation. The possibility of divine forgiveness exists alongside the certainty of divine judgment. Medieval Christianity doesn't just offer hope, it demands an accounting for every thought, word, and deed, judged by standards that human effort alone can never fully satisfy. Hell isn't a distant abstraction. It's a vivid, immediate possibility that preachers describe with graphic detail designed to motivate righteous behavior through terror of the consequences of sin. The torments awaiting the damned are depicted in artwork that decorates church walls, ensuring that everyone from literate scholars to illiterate peasants understands exactly what awaits those who die unrepentant. Even the promise of heaven carries its own form of fear for people whose entire experience involves physical labor, bodily needs, and earthly relationships. Eternal bliss is difficult to imagine when your concept of pleasure involves things like rest after hard work, food when hungry, warmth when cold, and the companionship of family and friends, an existence without bodies, without labor, without the familiar rhythms of earthly life, sounds less like reward than like a form of existence so alien it might as well be another kind of death. These fears, while they might seem primitive or superstitious to modern understanding, serve important psychological and social functions. They encourage caution in situations where recklessness could prove fatal. They promote community cooperation in the face of shared threats. They provide explanations for misfortunes that might otherwise drive people to despair or madness. Most importantly, they foster a kind of humility that acknowledges human limitations while encouraging faith in powers greater than individual understanding. This humility doesn't lead to passive resignation. Medieval people work as hard as any humans in history to improve their conditions and protect their families. But it does provide a framework for accepting that some things lie beyond human control. That wisdom involves knowing the difference between problems that can be solved and mysteries that must be endured. As the evening stories wind down and the fire burns low, as people begin the transition from communal wakefulness to individual sleep, there's a sense of completion that encompasses both the day's work and the night's entertainment. The stories have been told, the fears acknowledged, but contained within familiar narratives, the joys celebrated and shared. In this transition from light to darkness, from community to solitude, from wakefulness to sleep, you understand something about the rhythm of medieval life that goes deeper than the practical concerns of agriculture and craftsmanship. There's a recognition here that human existence involves both joy and fear, both community and isolation, both understanding and mystery, all held together in patterns that provide meaning without requiring complete comprehension. The darkness that surrounds your candlelit room isn't empty. It's full of presence, both comforting and threatening, both known and unknowable. As sleep approaches, you carry with you the voices of the evening's stories, the warmth of shared laughter, and the quiet confidence that comes from being part of something larger than yourself, something that includes the living and the dead, the seen and the unseen, the earthly and the divine. Tomorrow will bring new work, new challenges, new opportunities for both fear and joy. But tonight, surrounded by the familiar walls of your medieval dwelling, you rest within a worldview that has room for mystery, that expects both blessing and hardship, and that finds meaning in the patient repetition of ancient patterns. Chapter 4: Extraordinary People in an Ordinary World. In the gentle shadows of our medieval evening, let us turn our attention to individuals whose lives transcended the ordinary boundaries of their time, yet who remained fundamentally human in their hopes, fears, and desires. Tonight, we meet three souls whose stories illuminate the extraordinary possibilities that existed even within the constraints of medieval life. First, imagine a woman whose very existence challenges everything you might assume about the limitations placed on medieval women. Her name is Eleanor, and her story unfolds like the most improbable romance, except that every impossible detail actually happened. Picture, if you will, the sun-warmed courts of Aquitaine in southern France, where troubadours sing of courtly love, and the air itself seems perfumed with poetry and possibility. Here, in a world where women are expected to be silent, obedient, and decorative, grows a girl who will become one of the most powerful political figures of her age. Eleanor inherits the Duchy of Aquitaine at 15, not an unusual age for such responsibilities in a world where life expectancy makes delayed adulthood a luxury few can afford. But what happens next reads like fantasy. She becomes Queen of France through marriage to Louis VII, a union that should have satisfied any reasonable ambition. But Eleanor is not satisfied with being merely decorative. She brings to the rather austere French court the sophisticated culture of her southern homeland, poetry, music, ideas about romantic love that challenge the strictly practical nature of most medieval marriages. She surrounds herself with troubadours and scholars, creating what amounts to a traveling salon that follows her from castle to castle. And then comes the adventure that no novelist would dare invent. Eleanor decides to join the Second Crusade, not as a camp follower or passive observer, but leading her own contingent of knights, complete with her ladies-in-waiting, creating what medieval chroniclers describe with barely concealed amazement as an army that includes both warriors and a mobile court. Imagine her riding across the dusty plains of Anatolia, her traveling court a splash of color and culture in the midst of a military campaign. She brings along portable luxuries, silk pavilions, musicians, even her own baggage train of books and writing materials. The French soldiers, accustomed to purely military expeditions, must have found themselves in something resembling an armed literary festival. The crusade fails, as most crusades do, but Eleanor's marriage to Louis fails too. And here's where her story becomes even more remarkable. In an age when divorce is almost impossible, Eleanor manages to have her marriage annulled on grounds of consanguinity, essentially arguing that she and Louis are too closely related, a claim that requires considerable legal creativity, since their relationship was well known when they married. But the truly astonishing part comes next. Within 8 weeks of her divorce, Eleanor marries Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou, who will shortly become Henry II of England. With this marriage, Eleanor transforms from Queen of France to Queen of England, bringing with her the vast Duchy of Aquitaine as her dowry. Think about the audacity of this choice. Eleanor is now in her early 30s, ancient by medieval standards, and she chooses her second husband for herself. Henry is 11 years younger, energetic, ambitious, and represents everything her first husband was not. Where Louis was pious and contemplative, Henry is dynamic and pragmatic. Where Louis approached problems through prayer and consultation, Henry acts with the swift decisiveness of a man who trusts his own judgment above all else. Their marriage produces 8 children, including some of the most famous figures in medieval history: Henry the Young King, Richard the Lionheart, Geoffrey of Brittany, and John Lackland, who will eventually sign the Magna Carta. But perhaps even more remarkably, Eleanor lives to see most of these children reach adulthood, marry, and have political careers of their own. Here's the detail that transforms Eleanor from historical figure to human being. She lives to be over 80 years old, an almost impossible age in medieval times. She outlives her husband by 15 years, outlives her son, Henry the Young King, outlives Richard the Lionheart, and serves as advisor and power behind the throne during the early years of King John's reign. Picture her in her final years, a grandmother who has been Queen of France, Queen of England, Duchess of Aquitaine, crusader, political prisoner, regent, diplomat, and patron of arts. She sits in her chambers at Fontevraud Abbey, where she has chosen to spend her last years, surrounded by books and manuscripts, still receiving visitors from across Europe who seek her counsel. She might be telling her grandchildren stories about the time she met the Byzantine emperor in Constantinople, or describing the markets of Antioch where spices from the Far East were sold alongside silks that felt like captured moonbeams. She remembers dancing at courts where 3 different languages were spoken fluently by most attendees, where political alliances were negotiated through poetry, where the future of kingdoms depended as much on cultural sophistication as military strength. Her life spans almost the entire 12th century, a period of enormous change and cultural flowering. She witnesses the rise of Gothic architecture, the development of courtly romance as a literary form, the establishment of universities, and the gradual transformation of Europe from a collection of feudal territories into something resembling modern nation-states. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about Eleanor is how thoroughly human she remains throughout her extraordinary life. She loves passionately both her husbands and her children. She grieves deeply when her sons die before her. She makes political alliances based partly on emotion and partly on calculation. She holds grudges, forgives injuries, and maintains friendships across decades of political upheaval. In her final years, as she prepares for death with the practical acceptance that medieval people brought to mortality, Eleanor represents something profound about human possibility. Even within the constraints of medieval society, even within the limitations placed specifically on women, it was possible to live a life of extraordinary scope, influence, and experience. Her tomb effigy at Fontevraud shows her holding a book, reading for eternity, a detail that captures something essential about who she was. Eleanor was not just a political figure. She was an intellectual, a patron of learning, a woman who understood that power without culture is mere brutality, and that culture without power is mere decoration. Now, let our minds travel northward and slightly forward in time to a Benedictine monastery in the German hills, where another extraordinary woman creates a different kind of legacy. If Eleanor represents the possibilities available to a woman born to political power, Hildegard von Bingen demonstrates what could be achieved through intellectual and spiritual gifts that transcended all social boundaries. Hildegard enters the monastery as a child, not unusual in an age when families often dedicated younger children to religious life as a form of social investment and spiritual insurance. But from the beginning, it's clear that she possesses something that sets her apart from her fellow nuns. She sees visions. In a less enlightened age, or under different circumstances, such claims might have led to accusations of heresy, madness, or witchcraft. But Hildegard's visions come clothed in such profound theological insight, such practical wisdom, and such obvious intellectual brilliance that even the Pope himself declares them authentic communications from God. Picture her in her scriptorium, surrounded by parchments covered with her careful handwriting, illuminated manuscripts that glow with colors mixed according to her own specifications. She's simultaneously working on a treatise about the medicinal properties of plants, a musical composition that pushes the boundaries of what voices can achieve, and a theological work that attempts to explain the relationship between the human body and the divine cosmos. Her medical writings demonstrate an understanding of anatomy and physiology that won't be equaled by university-trained physicians for centuries. She dissects plants, observes their effects on human health, and develops treatments that actually work, a remarkable achievement in an age when medical practice often caused more harm than healing. But Hildegard doesn't just catalog plant properties. She develops a comprehensive theory of health that connects physical wellness to spiritual and emotional states. She understands that the human body exists within multiple interconnected systems: environmental, nutritional, psychological, and spiritual. Her treatments address the whole person, not just isolated symptoms. In her garden at the monastery, she cultivates medicinal herbs with the careful attention of both scientist and mystic. She observes how different plants respond to various growing conditions, how their potency changes with the seasons, how preparation methods affect their therapeutic value. She records these observations in manuscripts that read like a combination of botanical textbook and spiritual meditation. But perhaps even more remarkable than her medical knowledge is her music. Hildegard composes chants that stretch the human voice to its limits, melodies that seem to spiral upward like musical prayers seeking heaven. Her compositions are so complex, so demanding, that modern singers require extensive training to perform them properly. Listen, in your imagination, to her Symphonia Armini Celestium Revelationum, a cycle of songs that attempts to capture in human music the harmony she hears in her visions. The melodies don't follow the conventional rules of medieval plainchant. They leap and soar with an otherworldly quality that suggests voices not quite bound by earthly limitations. Her nuns spend hours each day practicing these compositions, their voices blending in harmonies that float through the stone corridors of the monastery like audible incense. Visitors describe feeling transported as if the music opens doors to spiritual realms normally closed to human perception. But Hildegard's genius extends even beyond medicine and music into pure theology and natural philosophy. She develops a cosmological system that explains the relationship between macrocosm and microcosm, between the structure of the universe and the structure of human consciousness. Her writings describe a universe that is alive, interconnected, and suffused with divine presence that can be accessed through proper understanding and spiritual practice. She even invents her own language, lingua ignota, complete with its own alphabet and vocabulary of over 1,000 words. This isn't mere linguistic playfulness. It's an attempt to create a form of communication that transcends the limitations of conventional language, words that can express spiritual realities more directly than ordinary human speech. Picture her in her later years, now abbess of her own monastery, corresponding with kings and emperors, with other abbots and abbesses, with scholars across Europe. Her letters demonstrate a political acuity that rivals Eleanor's. She advises rulers on matters of state, mediates between competing factions, and generally functions as an unofficial diplomat whose spiritual authority gives her access to the highest levels of medieval society. But unlike Eleanor, whose power comes from birth and marriage, Hildegard's influence stems entirely from her intellectual and spiritual gifts. She represents the possibility that in medieval society, extraordinary ability could transcend almost any social barrier, that a woman religious could achieve levels of influence and respect normally reserved for the highest nobles or church hierarchy. She walks through her monastery gardens in the evening light, examining plants whose properties she's still discovering, humming melodies that haven't yet found their way into formal compositions. Around her, the nuns who have chosen to follow her leadership go about their evening tasks with the calm efficiency that comes from believing they are participants in something larger than themselves. Hildegard sees connections everywhere, between the movement of stars and the circulation of blood, between the harmony of music and the harmony of creation, between the structure of plants and the structure of human souls. Her visions aren't escapes from reality. They're deeper penetrations into reality, glimpses of the patterns that connect all existence. She dies at 81, another impossibly long life for medieval times, surrounded by manuscripts that will influence medical practice, musical composition, and theological thought for centuries. Her final writings describe death not as ending, but as transformation, a movement from one form of consciousness to another, like a musical phrase that resolves into silence while somehow continuing to resonate. Our final portrait takes us into a very different world, though one equally remarkable in its own way. If Eleanor represents political power, and Hildegard spiritual, intellectual authority, William Marshall embodies the medieval ideal of knighthood so perfectly that his life reads like an instruction manual for chivalric virtue. William begins life with nothing but his own abilities, a younger son of a minor noble family, with no inheritance to expect, and no prospects beyond what his sword arm and his character can earn. In most eras, this would be a recipe for failure or criminality. But in the medieval world, where personal merit can still triumph over circumstance, William's combination of martial skill and unwavering integrity creates opportunities that wealth alone cannot purchase. His early career unfolds on the tournament circuit, that peculiar medieval institution where knights gathered to test their skills in mock combat that was often more dangerous than actual warfare. Tournaments aren't just sporting events, they're trade fairs for military professionals, marriage markets for ambitious families, and entertainment that draws spectators from across Europe. Picture young William riding from tournament to tournament, his horse and armor his only possessions, living entirely on prize money and the hospitality of fellow knights. He develops a reputation not just for skill at arms, but for the kind of reliability that makes other knights willing to fight beside him, that makes lords willing to employ him, that makes everyone who deals with him trust his word completely. This trustworthiness becomes his greatest asset. In an age when political loyalty shifts with frightening frequency, when today's ally becomes tomorrow's enemy based on marriage alliances and inheritance disputes, William develops a reputation for absolute fidelity to his sworn oaths. Once he gives his word, once he accepts responsibility for something or someone, he will die before breaking that commitment. This reputation brings him to the attention of Eleanor of Aquitaine herself, who chooses him as mentor and protector for her son, Henry the young king. For a landless knight, this represents the opportunity of several lifetimes, access to the highest circles of nobility, a chance to demonstrate his abilities on the largest possible stage, and potential rewards that could transform him from hired sword to landed nobleman. But the appointment also reveals something crucial about William's character. Henry the young king is challenging, charming but irresponsible, brave but reckless, generous but profligate. Other tutors have failed to manage him. William succeeds not by controlling Henry, but by earning his genuine affection and respect while somehow channeling his wilder impulses into productive directions. When Henry dies young, as many medieval nobles do, William faces a crisis that defines his entire subsequent career. He could exploit his position, could use his knowledge of court secrets for personal advantage, could transfer his loyalty to whichever master offers the best rewards. Instead, he does something that astonishes his contemporaries. He keeps his promises to a dead man, continues to serve Henry's interests, even though Henry can no longer reward him, and generally behaves as if honor matters more than advantage. This decision transforms William from merely skilled knight to legendary figure. Word spreads throughout the chivalric community that here is a man whose loyalty transcends death itself, whose word is absolutely trustworthy, who embodies the ideals that most knights honor more in theory than practice. The result is that everyone wants William's service. His reputation becomes his greatest weapon and his most valuable asset. Kings compete to employ him not just because he's skilled in battle, but because having William Marshall on your side signals to everyone else that your cause is honorable, that you're someone who deserves loyalty, that you understand the true meaning of knighthood. He serves 4 more English kings after Henry's death: Henry II, Richard the Lionheart, John, and finally Henry III. This spans almost 50 years of service through wars, rebellions, political upheavals, and dynastic changes that destroyed other careers. William not only survives all these transformations, but actually increases in influence and respect with each succeeding reign. The culmination comes when King John dies, leaving as heir a 9-year-old boy whose claim to the throne faces challenges from French invasion and internal rebellion. The English nobility chooses William Marshall, now in his 70s, to serve as regent for the child king, a landless knight, through pure merit and character, becomes the de facto ruler of England. Picture him in those final years of his life, an old man whose body bears the scars of dozens of battles and tournaments, but whose mind remains sharp and whose judgment is sought by every important figure in English political life. He faces the daunting task of defending England against French invasion while simultaneously managing the complex politics of English nobility, all in the name of a child king whose authority depends entirely on William's reputation and skill. He succeeds brilliantly. The French are defeated, the rebellious barons are reconciled, and young Henry III's throne is secured. William demonstrates that military skill, combined with political wisdom and unwavering integrity, can accomplish what raw power alone cannot achieve. In his final illness, as medieval people do, he prepares for death with the same careful attention he once brought to preparing for tournaments. He distributes his possessions, ensures his family's security, and makes peace with any lingering enemies. His deathbed becomes a place of pilgrimage for knights who want to hear his final words, to receive some fragment of the wisdom that guided his extraordinary life. His tomb effigy shows him as a knight in full armor, but with hands positioned in prayer rather than grasping sword hilt. The message is clear. William understood that true knighthood involves spiritual as well as martial discipline, that the greatest victories are won through character rather than force, that honor given freely is more valuable than power seized through ambition. William Marshall's life demonstrates that even in the medieval world, with all its limitations and brutalities, it remained possible to live according to ideals that transcended self-interest. His career proves that integrity, properly applied, could be as effective as intelligence or ruthlessness. that reputation, earned through consistent virtue, could become a form of wealth more valuable than gold or land. As our portraits of these three extraordinary lives draw to a close, notice what they share despite their very different paths. Each found ways to transcend the normal limitations of their time while remaining fundamentally grounded in the realities of medieval life. Eleanor, Hildegard, and William didn't escape their world. They found ways to reshape it through the force of exceptional character combined with exceptional ability. Their stories remind us that human possibility isn't confined by historical circumstances, that even in ages we consider primitive or restrictive, individuals could achieve forms of greatness that remain inspiring centuries later. They lived as fully human beings within their particular constraints, while somehow managing to touch the timeless qualities that define human excellence in any age. And now, as our medieval world begins to soften around the edges, like watercolors touched by morning dew, as the stone walls grow translucent and the candlelight flickers with the rhythm of your own breathing, it's time to let this ancient dream settle into that quiet place where memories and imagination meet. Our journey has carried us through a single day that somehow contained an entire lifetime, an entire era. We felt the rough scratch of straw against skin, tasted the bitter honesty of weak ale, heard the bronze voices of church bells measuring time in prayers rather than productivity. We've walked behind ox-drawn plows, felt the heat of forge fires against our faces, and listened to stories told by firelight that made the boundary between real and magical seem as thin as morning mist. We've seen that though the world has changed beyond recognition, the human heart remains remarkably constant. Medieval people loved and feared, hoped and despaired, laughed and wept for reasons that would be immediately familiar to anyone living today. They found joy in simple pleasures, shared meals, communal celebrations, the satisfaction of work well done. They faced uncertainties with courage born of necessity and faith born of vulnerability. The distance between their world and ours is measured not just in centuries, but in fundamental assumptions about how life should be lived. They expected hardship and were grateful for comfort. They assumed scarcity and celebrated abundance. They accepted mystery and found wonder in the inexplicable. Perhaps most significantly, they understood themselves as part of something larger, a community, a tradition, a cosmic order that provided meaning even when it didn't provide ease. In stepping into their shoes, even briefly, even in the safe confines of imagination, we've gained something precious: perspective. That glass of clean water you'll drink tomorrow morning represents a luxury beyond medieval dreams. That soft mattress waiting for you, that electric light you can summon with a simple switch, that medicine cabinet filled with remedies that actually work. These aren't just conveniences. They're miracles that would have left our medieval ancestors speechless with wonder. But perhaps the greatest gift this journey offers isn't gratitude for modern advantages, but recognition of what we might have lost along the way. The medieval world, for all its hardships, possessed a kind of wholeness that's difficult to find in our fragmented age. Work connected directly to survival. Community bonds were forged by necessity, and time moved at the speed of natural processes rather than artificial urgency. There was a rhythm to medieval life that modern existence has largely abandoned, not the frantic pace of deadline-driven productivity, but the patient rhythm of seasons, of daily prayer, of work that followed natural patterns rather than fighting against them. People live closer to the earth, closer to the sky, closer to the fundamental realities that technology now buffers us from experiencing directly. Their acceptance of limitation paradoxically created a different kind of freedom. When choice is constrained, when possibilities are clearly defined, when social roles are largely predetermined, certain forms of anxiety simply don't exist. The medieval person wasn't paralyzed by infinite options or haunted by the fear of missing out on alternative lives. They found meaning within boundaries that we might consider restrictive, but that also provided clarity, purpose, and a sense of belonging that many modern people desperately seek. As the candle flame that has lit our medieval dwelling grows smaller and dimmer, casting dancing shadows that seem to contain the ghosts of all the people whose lives we've glimpsed tonight, remember that this isn't really an ending. This is a return, a gentle awakening from one dream into another. The medieval world we visited together exists now only in imagination, in the silent testimony of stone buildings and illuminated manuscripts, in the echo of stories passed down through generations of telling and retelling. But something of it persists, something essential about human nature that no amount of technological change can alter. We carry within us the same capacity for wonder that made medieval people see fairies in forest shadows. We possess the same need for community that drew them to village festivals. We share the same desire for meaning that sent them on pilgrimages and crusades. We experience the same mixture of hope and fear that made them tell stories by firelight and build cathedrals that reach toward heaven. Tonight, as you settle into your own bed, so much softer than any medieval straw mattress, so much cleaner than any rush-strewn floor, carry with you the memory of a different way of being human. Remember the satisfaction of work measured by the sun's arc rather than the clock's tyranny. Remember the peace that comes from accepting mystery rather than demanding explanation for everything. Remember the community that forms when survival depends on cooperation rather than competition. The great tapestry of history that we've glimpsed tonight continues to be woven, thread by thread, choice by choice, life by life. Your own thread is part of that pattern, connected to all the threads that came before and all those that will follow. The medieval people whose world we visited tonight couldn't have imagined your life any more than you can truly imagine the lives of those who will follow you centuries from now. But across all those centuries, Across all the changes in technology and society and culture, something persists: the human heart that seeks meaning, the human spirit that finds joy even in difficulty, the human mind that creates beauty even in the midst of hardship. Let your breathing slow now. Let your body sink deeper into the comfort of your modern bed. Let your mind release its hold on the day's concerns and tomorrow's obligations. You are surrounded by conveniences and securities that would seem miraculous to medieval eyes, protected by knowledge and technology that represents the accumulated wisdom of centuries. But you are also heir to something deeper than technology: the accumulated wisdom of the human heart, the understanding that life's meaning comes not from what we possess, but from how we choose to live, not from what we can control, but from how we respond to what we cannot control. Sleep now, wrapped in the comfort of your own time, but enriched by the memory of another. Let the stories we've shared tonight settle into that deep place where dreams and truth converge. When you wake, you'll return to your modern world, but perhaps with new eyes, perhaps with a deeper appreciation for both how far we've come and what we might have left behind. The medieval world grows dim now, fading like the last light of a winter evening. The candle gutters and goes out. The stone walls dissolve into the familiar comfort of your own room. The church bells fall silent, but the stories remain. The connections remain. The reminder that you are part of something larger, older, and more enduring than any single lifetime remains. Rest now, fellow traveler through time. Rest in the peace that comes from understanding your place in the great human story that began long before you and will continue long after, but that is made richer and more complete by your own unique thread in history's endless tapestry. Sweet dreams and gentle sleep.